The cold, unforgiving steel snapped shut around Monica Turner's wrists, the sharp clicks echoing the sudden, frantic beating of her heart. In the sterile, marble-floored lobby of the bank she helped run, surrounded by the silent, staring faces of strangers and the accusatory glares of two police officers, she was no longer a vice president. She was a suspect. She had walked in to deposit a check, a reward for her hard work, and now she was being treated like a criminal in her own house. How could a simple Saturday errand unravel into a nightmare of humiliation? And what would happen when they finally realized the colossal mistake they were making? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Earlier that morning, the world had been a place of quiet order and well-earned peace. Sunlight, crisp and golden as a perfect autumn apple, streamed through the large windows of Monica's apartment, illuminating the clean lines of her chic, minimalist decor. The space was a reflection of her mind, uncluttered, intentional, and serene. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, momentarily catching the light before vanishing. One beam fell across a silver-framed photograph on a floating shelf. A candid shot of her, laughing with her parents, her father's arm slung proudly around her shoulder. Next to it, another photo captured a more formal moment. Monica, poised and professional, in a deep blue gown, shaking hands with the CEO of Sterling Trust Bank at a charity gala, a wide smile on both their faces. This apartment was her sanctuary, the one place where the immense pressures of her career could be shed at the door like a heavy coat. She was enjoying a rare Saturday off, a day blissfully free of board meetings, conference calls, and strategic planning sessions. Dressed in a worn-out, faded gray college hoodie and comfortable black yoga pants, she was the antithesis of the powerful executive she was from Monday to Friday. This was Monica, unvarnished. She cradled a warm ceramic mug in her hands, the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee rising to meet her as she sipped. She padded across the polished hardwood floor to the kitchen island, her gaze falling upon the check lying there. It was printed on heavy cream-colored paper, bearing the familiar logo of Sterling Trust Bank. The amount, written in precise, elegant script, was $50,000. It was a bonus, a tangible symbol of a grueling 6-month project she had poured her heart and soul into. She had spearheaded the bank's new Community First investment program, a landmark initiative designed to provide capital for small businesses in underserved neighborhoods. It was more than just a professional victory. It was a personal one. As the daughter of a teacher and a mechanic from one of those very neighborhoods, she felt a profound sense of pride and responsibility. She had worked relentlessly, fueled by a quiet determination to prove that success was not dictated by one's starting point. Her journey to becoming the vice president of community and corporate relations had been a steep climb, and this check felt like a moment to pause at a sun-drenched summit and appreciate the view. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. She should deposit it, get it out of the way so she could fully embrace her day of blissful nothingness. The thought of walking into a branch in her comfortable, anonymous clothes was appealing, for one day she wouldn't be VP Turner, the woman whose presence caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere, prompting hushed whispers and straightened ties. She would just be a customer, another face in the crowd. It was a small freedom, but one she cherished. Grabbing her keys and a small leather wallet, she carefully tucked the check inside, the crisp paper a reassuring presence against her fingertips. She stepped out of her apartment and into the crisp autumn air, pulling her hood up against the gentle breeze. The city was alive with the vibrant energy of the weekend, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a part of it. Not just an observer from a high-rise office window. She decided to go to the Oakwood branch, a location she didn't frequent, primarily because it was close to a farmer's market she wanted to visit afterward. The thought of fresh produce and artisanal bread was the perfect reward for her morning's errand. When she pushed open the heavy glass door of the bank, the familiar environment enveloped her. The scent of clean, polished marble, the quiet, respectful hum of commerce, the soft thud of the rubber stamp. It was all part of a world she knew intimately. A sense of ownership and pride washed over her as she looked around. She had helped build this. Her work, her policies, her vision, they were all part of the DNA of Sterling Trust. She took her place in line, a handful of people ahead of her. The queue moved steadily, and soon she found herself stepping forward to the next available teller. The woman behind the plexiglass barrier was in her late 40s, with tightly permed blonde hair and a tense set to her mouth. Her name tag read, Karen. Her eyes, sharp and constantly moving, seemed to be scanning for trouble, for any deviation from the norm. When Monica stepped up to the counter, Karen's professional smile was a thin, brittle thing that didn't reach her suspicious eyes. "Good morning," Monica said, her own smile warm and genuine. "I'd like to deposit this, please, all into my checking." She slid the $50,000 check and her Sterling Trust debit card across the smooth, cool surface of the counter. Karen picked up the check. Her movements were deft, practiced, but they paused for a fraction of a second as she registered the amount. Her eyes, which had briefly flickered over Monica's face, now widened almost imperceptibly. $50,000. Her gaze dropped from the number on the check to Monica's faded college hoodie, then back to her face, lingering for a moment too long. The friendly mask didn't just slip, it shattered. It was replaced by a cool, impenetrable wall of suspicion. The shift was so sudden, so complete, it was like a physical blow. "This is a large amount," Karen stated, her voice flat, devoid of the practiced pleasantry from moments before. It was an accusation disguised as a statement of fact. "I'll need to see some ID." "Of course," Monica replied, keeping her tone pleasant, though a knot of unease was beginning to tighten in her stomach. She had anticipated this, of course. It was standard procedure. She retrieved her driver's license from her wallet and passed it to the teller. Karen took the license, her fingers barely brushing Monica's. She scrutinized it with an intensity that felt less like due diligence and more like an interrogation. She held the ID next to the check, her head tilting back and forth as she compared the name, Monica Turner, on both documents. Her lips were pursed in a thin, disapproving line. She turned to her computer terminal and began to type, her fingers striking the keys with a sharp, aggressive rhythm. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Monica could feel the eyes of the people in line behind her, their curiosity piqued by the delay. Finally, Karen looked up, her expression unreadable, but her posture radiating suspicion. "A check for this amount requires a manager's approval," she announced, though her body language screamed that this was more than a simple procedural step. "I'll have to step away for a moment." She excused herself, but Monica's eyes followed her, a cold knot of dread beginning to form in the pit of her stomach. Karen didn't walk towards the glass-walled office of the branch manager, which was clearly visible from the teller line. Instead, she took a sharp right and disappeared into a back room, an area reserved for staff only. Through the gap in the doorway, Monica could see her pick up a telephone. Karen turned her back to the lobby, but Monica could still make out the hushed, urgent tones of her voice, the tense set of her shoulders. A wave of nausea washed over Monica. She knew this protocol. She had helped write some of the training manuals herself. A hold might be placed on a large deposit, especially for a non-customer, but she had presented her own bank's debit card. A manager might be called to verify funds or provide an override. But a secret phone call from a back room, that was not standard procedure. That was the protocol for suspected fraud. That was the protocol for when you were calling the police. The sickening realization dawned on her, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. It wasn't the check they were scrutinizing. It was her hoodie, her skin. She was being profiled in her own bank. The warmth of her peaceful morning evaporated, replaced by a chilling, familiar dread. The day was no longer her own. Monica stood frozen at the teller window, the smooth, cold marble beneath her elbows, the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the large, ornate clock on the far wall a hammer blow against the fragile shell of her composure. The line behind her, once a patient, shuffling queue, had become a gallery of gawkers. A man in a business suit, who had been impatiently checking his watch, now stared openly, his expression a mixture of annoyance and morbid curiosity. A young woman with a baby in a stroller had her phone angled slightly upwards, and Monica felt a sickening certainty that she was being filmed. She could feel their eyes on her, a physical weight pressing down. They weren't just looking, they were judging. Their gazes dissected her, taking in the worn fabric of her hoodie, the casual style of her hair, the color of her skin, and connecting them to the teller's secretive retreat and the uncomfortable delay. She was no longer a fellow customer. She was a spectacle, a problem, a story they would tell later. Her heart pounded a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. She fought the urge to fidget, to cross her arms, to do anything that might be interpreted as guilt or agitation. Instead, she forced herself to stand perfectly still, her posture straight, her expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. She focused on her breathing, drawing in slow, deliberate breaths, just as she had coached nervous junior executives to do before a big presentation. Inhale calm, exhale chaos. But the chaos was inside her, a swirling vortex of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. She replayed the brief interaction with Karen in her mind, searching for a misstep, a wrong word, a gesture that could have been misinterpreted. Had her smile not been warm enough? Had her tone been off? The questions were a useless exercise in self-flagellation, and she caught herself, a fresh wave of indignation washing away the doubt. She had done nothing wrong. She had walked into a bank, her bank, to deposit a check she had earned through tireless work, and she had been polite and compliant. The fault was not in her actions, but in the lens through which they were being viewed. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. For the past 2 years, she had poured her professional energy into transforming Sterling Trust's corporate culture. She had personally overseen the development of the bank's new diversity, equity, and inclusion program, a comprehensive initiative that went far beyond the usual corporate lip service. She remembered the late nights, the passionate debates with the board, the satisfaction of finally getting their unanimous approval. She had written the scripts for the training videos herself, crafting scenarios designed to challenge unconscious bias. One of them, ironically, was titled Perception versus Reality at the Teller Window. It featured an actor playing a young, casually dressed tech entrepreneur trying to deposit a large initial funding check, and it walked employees through the process of verification without resorting to suspicion. She had approved the training modules, signed off on the facilitator guides, and even sat in on several of the pilot sessions, watching as employees like Karen nodded along, supposedly absorbing the lessons. She was a living, breathing embodiment of the bank's proclaimed values, a success story they featured in their annual reports. And yet, here she was, on the receiving end of the very prejudice her programs were designed to eradicate, being treated like a criminal by an employee who had likely completed a training module with Monica Turner's digital signature on the certificate of completion. The system she had worked so hard to reform was now failing her in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The heavy glass doors of the bank swung open with a decisive push, and the low hum of the lobby was instantly silenced. 2 police officers strode in, their presence commanding the space, their polished black boots squeaking rhythmically on the marble floor. The jingle of their equipment, the crisp snap of their leather duty belts, the sheer solidness of their presence, it all seemed to suck the air out of the room. The older officer had a stern, weathered face, a thick mustache, and the weary eyes of a man who had seen too much. His name tag read Smith. His partner was younger, with a short, aggressive haircut and a restless energy that radiated from him. He scanned the lobby with a challenging glare, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered sidearm. His name tag identified him as Jones. They didn't look around, they didn't ask for directions. Their path was direct, their destination predetermined. They walked straight towards Monica's teller window, their eyes fixed on her. The last vestiges of normalcy in the bank evaporated. The woman with the phone was now holding it up openly, her thumb no doubt pressing the record button. Officer Smith stopped directly in front of Monica, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, his expression unreadable but his authority absolute. He completely ignored the teller window, addressing her as if she were already in custody. "Ma'am," he began, his voice loud, projective, clearly intended for everyone in the bank to hear. "We received a call about a suspicious individual attempting to pass a fraudulent check." The public declaration hit her with the force of a physical slap. Every head turned, every eye was on her. She was no longer just a person of interest. She was a suspect, publicly accused. The blood rushed to her face, a hot tide of shame and fury. She fought to keep her voice even, to project the calm authority she was used to wielding in a boardroom, not a bank lobby under a cloud of accusation. "There must be a misunderstanding, officer," she said, her words clear and steady despite the tremor she felt deep inside. "This is my bonus check from Sterling Trust's corporate office. I work for the bank. Officer Jones let out a short, sharp sound, a scoff that dripped with derision. Right, he sneered, a smirk playing on his lips. And I'm the CEO. Ma'am, we need you to step away from the counter. As if on cue, Karen the teller reappeared from the back room. She looked pale, her eyes wide, but there was a glint of self-righteousness in her expression. She had done her duty. She had protected the bank. She refused to meet Monica's gaze, looking instead at the officers as if they were her personal saviors. She came in dressed like that, Karen said, gesturing vaguely at Monica's hoodie with a trembling hand. Anne tried to deposit this. She pushed the $50,000 check towards the officers. It just felt wrong. It just felt wrong. The words hung in the air, a flimsy, transparent justification for a decision rooted in pure prejudice. The officers accepted it without question. They dismissed Monica's explanation as if she hadn't spoken at all. They didn't ask to see her driver's license, which was still lying on the counter. They didn't ask if she had an employee ID. They didn't suggest speaking to the branch manager, whose office was a mere 50 feet away. Their questions were not designed to ascertain the truth. They were designed to trip her up, to confirm the suspicion that had already been planted. "Where did you get this check, ma'am?" Officer Smith asked, his tone implying it couldn't possibly be hers. "I already told you," Monica said, her patience wearing dangerously thin. "It's my bonus, from my employer, Sterling Trust Bank." "And what is it you do for the bank?" Officer Jones chimed in, his voice laced with incredulity. He leaned against the counter, adopting a posture of casual intimidation. Monica looked him directly in the eye. She refused to be cowed. "I am the Vice President of Community and Corporate Relations." The smirk on Officer Jones's face widened into an open, mocking grin. He exchanged a look with his partner, a silent communication that said, "Can you believe this one?" The sting of his dismissal was sharper than any physical blow. It wasn't just disbelief, it was mockery. It was a complete and utter invalidation of her identity, her success, her entire life's work. All because she didn't fit his narrow, prejudiced image of what a bank executive should look like. The situation was no longer a misunderstanding. It was an active, public interrogation. A slow-motion character assassination based on nothing more than a hoodie and a teller's bad feeling. A growing sense of unreality washed over her, the chilling sensation of being trapped in a scene she had only ever witnessed on the news. A story that happened to other people. Today, she was the other people. The air grew thick and heavy, and the polished marble floor felt like it was sinking beneath her feet. A tight, controlled fury, cold and sharp, began to burn through the fog of Monica's disbelief. This was the point where a simple misunderstanding tipped over into willful ignorance, a deliberate refusal to see the truth. She had given them every opportunity to de-escalate, to use reason, to simply do their jobs correctly. Now, she would try one last time, not with the pleading tone of a victim, but with the precise, unassailable facts of an executive. "Officers," she began, her voice low and tight, each word a carefully chosen weapon. "My name is Monica Turner. My employee number is 74321. You can verify my position and the legitimacy of this check with a simple call to the corporate headquarters. The number is on the back of my debit card, which is still on the counter. Or," she added, her voice hardening as she lifted her chin and pointed towards the glass-walled office at the far end of the lobby, "you can speak to the branch manager, David Chen, whose office is right there." The logic was irrefutable. The path to clarification was simple, direct, and would take less than 5 minutes. But Officer Smith simply shook his head, his expression a mask of weary impatience, as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "We're not playing games here," he said, his voice resonating with a finality that chilled her to the bone. "We have a report of a potential felony. You can make your calls from the station." Officer Jones pushed himself off the counter, his smirk gone, replaced by a look of grim purpose. "We've heard enough," he declared, his hand moving towards his hip. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The command hung in the air, stark and terrifying. "Turn around." It was an order that stripped away her identity, her accomplishments, her very personhood, leaving only a suspect. For a single defiant heartbeat, Monica considered refusing. The injustice of it was a physical force, screaming at her to stand her ground, to not give them the satisfaction of her compliance. But then, She saw the flicker in Officer Jones's eyes, the eager, almost predatory glint that told her he was hoping she would resist. She saw the way his hand was poised, the way his body was tensed, and she knew that refusal would not lead to a debate. It would lead to violence. It would give them the justification they needed to put her on the ground, to escalate this public humiliation into a physical assault. The faces in the crowd swam before her eyes, a blur of shock, fear, and a morbid, ravenous curiosity. They were waiting for the climax of the show. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a low, steady warning from her childhood. You have to be twice as good, twice as careful, twice as smart, just to get half as far. Don't ever give them an excuse. She had lived by that creed, building a fortress of professionalism and success around herself, a fortress she believed was impenetrable. And for what? To be brought down by a college hoodie and a $50,000 check. The fortress had been a fantasy. Slowly, deliberately, in an act that felt like the greatest surrender of her life, she turned. The movement was stiff, robotic. She presented her back to the officers and the entire watching bank. Officer Jones stepped forward immediately, grabbing her upper arms in a grip that was unnecessarily rough, yanking them back. A jolt of pain shot through her shoulder, but she refused to cry out, to give him the satisfaction. She stared straight ahead at the polished chrome of the water fountain, focusing on her distorted reflection as she felt the cold, unforgiving steel press against the delicate skin of her right wrist. Click. The sound was sharp, metallic, and absolute. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, a line being irrevocably crossed, the first cuff locked into place, biting into her flesh. He pulled her other arm back, and she felt the second cuff encircle her left wrist. Click. The sound of finality, the sound of her world breaking in two. The cuffs were brutally tight, the serrated edges digging into her skin with a vicious pressure. The cold of the metal was a profound shock, a physical manifestation of the icy dread that had consumed her. The officer's grip on her arm was like a vice, his fingers digging into her bicep. The air was thick with the smell of his leather duty belt, a faint, acrid scent of sweat, and the sterile lemony scent of the bank's cleaning products. It was a nauseating combination that she knew would be seared into her memory forever. As she stood there, cuffed and captive, a different feeling began to surface beneath the humiliation. It was a deep, ancestral rage, the culmination of countless similar indignities suffered by people who looked like her, in places just like this. It was the quiet fury of her grandfather being called by his first name by a boy half his age, the silent shame of her mother being followed through a department store, the weary resignation of her father being pulled over for driving a car that was too nice for his neighborhood. All those stories, all that history, it flowed into her in that moment. The fortress of her success hadn't crumbled. It had been revealed for what it was, a temporary shelter on borrowed land. The real world, the one her father had warned her about, had finally come for her. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, but the rage was a fire, hardening her spine into steel. "Let's go," Officer Jones grunted, giving her arm a rough tug. They began to lead her towards the entrance, a slow, deliberate procession of shame, the walk of shame. Every head in the bank turned to watch, every eye following her progress. The whispers had died, replaced by a thick, voyeuristic silence. The young woman with the phone was now bolder, her device held high and steady, tracking Monica's every step. The journey across the polished marble floor, a path she had crossed with pride just minutes earlier, now felt miles long. Each step was a fresh wave of public degradation, but as she walked, she lifted her head. She would not let them see her bow. She would not let them break her. She held her head high, her gaze fixed on the glass doors, a small, silent act of defiance in a moment of total powerlessness. Her dignity was the only thing she had left, and she would not surrender it. From behind her teller window, Karen watched the procession, her expression a strange, unsettling mixture of fear and grim satisfaction. She had seen a threat, and she had acted. In her mind, she was a hero. She had done her duty, protected the bank's assets from a woman who simply did not belong. She had no idea of the institutional catastrophe she had just unleashed, the corporate firestorm she had single-handedly ignited. She saw only the successful resolution of a problem she had identified. But not everyone saw it that way. A few windows down, a younger teller named Maria had been watching the entire scene unfold with a growing sense of horror. Maria was new, only 6 months on the job, but she was sharp. When the officers had first arrived and started their loud, accusatory questioning, she had heard the name the woman had given them, Monica Turner. The name was familiar. Maria had seen it on dozens of corporate memos, on the welcome video for new hires, on the posters in the break room announcing the new Community First initiative. While Officer Jones was smirking and Officer Smith was pontificating, Maria had felt a jolt of sickening recognition. It couldn't be. But the woman's calm, authoritative demeanor, even under this immense pressure, felt executive. Acting on a surge of pure adrenaline, Maria had discreetly excused herself from her window, muttering something about needing supplies from the back. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slipped away from the unfolding drama. She didn't go to the supply room. She made a beeline for the branch manager's office. The on-a-call light was illuminated on his door, but Maria didn't hesitate. She knocked, a series of sharp, frantic raps that conveyed an urgency beyond normal bank business. She knocked again, harder this time, praying he would answer. The future of the branch and her own gut feeling depended on it. Monica knew none of this. All she knew was the brutal tightness of the cuffs, the rough hand on her arm, and the burning stares of the crowd. She was a spectacle, a cautionary tale. This is what happens when you don't know your place. The glass doors loomed closer, a gateway back to the outside world, a world where she would no longer be an anonymous citizen, but a woman in handcuffs, a criminal in the eyes of the law and the public. The sunlight streaming through the glass seemed to mock her, a promise of a freedom that had just been stolen from her. Each step was a lifetime. Each breath was a battle, but she kept her head high, her eyes fixed forward, a queen being led from her own castle in chains. Just as the officers and Monica reached the heavy glass doors of the bank, a frantic shout, sharp and laced with pure panic, cut through the thick voyeuristic silence. "Stop! For God's sake! What are you doing? That's Vice President Turner." The voice, strained and cracking with desperation, belonged to the branch manager, David Chen. He came sprinting out of his office, a man whose entire professional life was built on composure and control, now a portrait of utter disarray. His tie was askew, his usually immaculate black hair was disheveled, and his face was a pale, ghostly mask of panic. Right behind him, looking equally terrified, was the young teller, Maria, the one who had recognized Monica's name and had the courage to interrupt her manager's conference call. Her hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and vindication. The effect of the manager's desperate cry was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging the entire bank into a state of suspended animation. The scene froze into a bizarre, silent tableau. Officer Jones, his hand still clamped firmly on Monica's arm, stopped dead in his tracks, his body tensed as if he had run into an invisible wall. Officer Smith, who had been reaching for the door handle, turned slowly, his brow furrowed in deep, profound confusion. The customers, who had been a sea of staring, whispering faces, were now utterly, completely stunned, their mouths agape, their eyes darting between the frantic manager and the woman in handcuffs. The phone camera, held aloft by the young woman near the back of the line, remained fixed on the scene, its unblinking lens capturing the dramatic, whiplash-inducing turning point of the entire ordeal. The sudden, deafening silence that replaced the whispers was more powerful than any sound, a vacuum that seemed to pull all the energy in the room towards the tableau at the door. The bright, indifferent sunlight streaming through the glass doors seemed to frame Monica, still in handcuffs, her head held high, as the calm, silent epicenter of this frozen, chaotic moment. David Chen didn't slow down. He rushed towards them, his expensive dress shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble, his eyes wide with a horror that was almost comical in its intensity. He took in the entire, catastrophic scene in a single, sweeping glance. The two police officers, the gawking crowd, and at the center of it all, Monica, his Monica, the Vice President of Corporate and Community Relations for the entire Sterling Trust institution, the woman whose signature was on the approval for his own last promotion. Standing there in her casual Saturday clothes, her wrists bound together in the cold, brutal steel of police-issue handcuffs. "What is the meaning of this?" David demanded, his voice shaking with a potent cocktail of fear and unadulterated fury. He wasn't just asking a question, he was trying to stop a runaway train from flying off a cliff. He jabbed a trembling finger first at the officers, then at Monica. "Do you have any idea who this is? This is Monica Turner. She is the Vice President of Corporate and Community Relations for all of Sterling Trust. That check," he said, his voice rising to a near shout as he pointed back towards the teller line where the check still lay, "is her corporate bonus, a bonus which I was personally notified about last week in a corporate-wide executive memo." The words, clear and undeniable, detonated in the silent lobby. If David's initial shout had frozen the scene, his explanation shattered it into a million pieces of dawning, sickening realization. The color drained from Officer Smith's face, as if a plug had been pulled. The stern, authoritative mask he wore crumbled, revealing a man suddenly adrift in a sea of catastrophic error. His mind raced, replaying the dispatch call, the teller's hushed, certain accusation, his own dismissive handling of the situation. He looked from the frantic, shouting manager to Monica's calm, cold face, and the full, horrifying weight of his mistake crashed down upon him. He had arrested a vice president of the very institution he was supposedly protecting. Officer Jones reacted as if he had been tasered. He snatched his hand away from Monica's arm, as if her skin had suddenly become white-hot, as if the fabric of her hoodie were burning him. The aggressive, swaggering confidence that had defined his every move evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a bewildered, slack-jawed young man who looked utterly lost. His eyes darted around wildly, searching for an explanation, for someone to blame, for an escape route from the professional abyss that had just opened up beneath his feet. His gaze landed on Karen, the teller, who was still standing behind her counter. Karen had shrunk. It was the only way to describe it. She seemed physically smaller, her shoulders hunched, her body cowering behind the plexiglass barrier that now felt less like a shield and more like the glass wall of a fishbowl. Her face, once a mask of grim satisfaction, was now ashen, the color of old parchment. The self-righteousness that had fueled her actions had been utterly extinguished, replaced by a pure, unadulterated terror that widened her eyes and stole the breath from her lungs. She looked like she had seen a ghost, the ghost of her career, her reputation, her future, all passing before her eyes. She saw the bewildered, accusatory look from Officer Jones, and she flinched, pressing herself further against the back counter, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Throughout this explosion of chaos, Monica remained perfectly still. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was more powerful than David's shouting, more damning than the officer's panicked expressions. She simply watched them, her eyes cold and clear as chips of ice, moving from one horrified face to the next. There was no triumph in her gaze, no flicker of, "I told you so." There was only a cold, quiet, and profound vindication. She watched the system that had so swiftly and casually condemned her now, frantically, clumsily, trying to eat itself. She watched the power dynamic of the entire room invert in the space of a single nanosecond. The officers who had held all the power, who had been the arbiters of her freedom, were now exposed, scrambling and utterly powerless. And she, the victim, the suspect, the woman in chains, was suddenly, undeniably the most powerful person in the room. The narrative had flipped, violently and irrevocably. The story was no longer cops catch a potential fraudster. It was bank humiliates its own executive in the most public way imaginable. Everyone in the bank, from the stunned customers to the man still filming on his phone, understood this new reality. They were witnesses to a corporate disaster of epic proportions. David Chen's frantic energy, a stark contrast to the frozen stillness of everyone else, only served to underscore the severity of the crisis. His panic was not just for Monica's dignity. It was for the bank's reputation, for the impending media firestorm, for the multi-million-dollar lawsuit that was already taking shape in his terrified imagination. He turned his fury back on the two officers, who now looked like chastened schoolboys standing before the principal. "Get those handcuffs off her!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous, silent lobby. "Now!" Officer Smith, whose entire career was built on projecting an aura of unshakable control, fumbled for the handcuff keys clipped to his belt. His hands, thick and calloused from years of service, trembled with a fine, palsied tremor that he could not conceal. The small, silver key seemed to mock him, refusing to align with the lock. He jabbed at the keyhole on Monica's right wrist, his knuckles brushing against the angry red indentation the steel had already carved into her skin. The silence in the bank was so absolute, so profound, that the frantic metallic scratching of the key against the cuff was the only sound in the world. Finally, with a clumsy twist, the mechanism gave way. The cuff sprang open with a soft, metallic sigh, a sound of release that was just as loud and significant as the sharp clicks of its locking. He moved to the other wrist, his movements now hurried and clumsy, desperate to undo the damage that he knew, with a sickening certainty, was irreparable. The second cuff sprang open. For a moment, Monica didn't move. She simply stood there, her hands now free but held in the same position behind her back, as if the memory of the steel was still imprinted on her. Then, slowly, she brought her arms forward, her movements deliberate and measured. She looked down at her wrists, at the raw, crimson bands of chafed skin that encircled them. They were a physical testament to the ordeal, a brand of humiliation that would fade from her skin but not from her memory. She rubbed them gently, not with the frantic energy of someone in pain, but with a slow, thoughtful motion, her touch almost detached, as if she were examining an artifact. Officer Smith cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the still air. "Ma'am, Ms. Turner," he stammered, the honorific now tasting like ash in his mouth. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Monica lifted her head, her eyes, which had been fixed on her wrists, now locking onto his. The cold, quiet vindication in them had been replaced by something far more formidable, a dangerously quiet resolve that was more terrifying than any shout could ever be. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice a low, resonant whisper that carried to every corner of the silent lobby. "No, officer. I believe what happened here was crystal clear." Her gaze drifted past him, a silent, sweeping indictment of the entire room. It moved past the stunned face of Officer Jones, who looked like a boy who had just shattered his mother's favorite vase. It moved past the gaping mouths of the customers, their faces a gallery of shock and secondhand shame. Finally, her gaze landed on the teller window where Karen was huddled, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, terrified sobs. Monica's eyes lingered on her for a single, heavy second. Karen flinched as if she had been physically struck, a small, choked sound escaping her lips. Monica's gaze then returned to Officer Smith, and her voice, when she spoke again, was pure steel. "Your name and badge number," she said. It was not a question. It was a command. "Both of you." Officer Smith, his face now slick with a sheen of cold sweat, began to recite his information in a mumbled, deferential tone. "Officer Smith, badge number 4815. Monica's eyes shifted to his partner. Officer Jones, who just minutes before had been the picture of arrogant authority, could not meet her gaze. He stared at a fixed point on the floor, his face flushed with a deep, blotchy red. "Officer Jones," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "Badge number 6266. Monica gave a single, sharp nod. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie, the same hoodie that had been part of the flimsy evidence against her, and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up, illuminating her calm, focused expression. With a preternatural steadiness, her thumb moved across the screen, opening a new note. She typed in their names and badge numbers, her movements methodical, precise, and utterly in control. There was no anger in her actions, no trembling fury. This was not personal, not anymore. This was procedural. She was an executive handling a critical incident, gathering data, establishing a record. The quiet, rhythmic tapping of her thumb on the glass screen was a sound of modern accountability, a digital counterpoint to the brutal, archaic clicks of the handcuffs. She was no longer the subject of the report. She was the one writing it. When she was finished, she looked up, her gaze bypassing the two disgraced officers entirely. She turned her attention to David Chen, who had been hovering nearby, wringing his hands and shifting his weight from foot to foot, like a man standing on hot coals. He looked like he was about to start apologizing again, to let loose a torrent of panicked, useless words. Monica cut him off before he could begin. "David," she said, her tone crisp and executive. The shock and humiliation had been burned away, forged in the crucible of her public degradation into an unbreakable, cold resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a vice president, and this was her bank, her crisis to manage. "Yes, Ms. Turner, of course, anything," he babbled, nodding his head vigorously. "I want all security footage from every camera in this branch for the last hour preserved," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Every angle, the lobby, the teller line, the exterior shots. Do not let it be erased or tampered with. I want a copy delivered to my office by courier, and the original locked in the branch vault. Is that understood?" "Yes, yes, of course," David confirmed, his eyes wide. "Second," she continued, her voice unwavering, "I want a full, detailed incident report on my desk by 9 a.m. Monday morning. It will include a timeline of events, a transcript of the call placed to the police department, and sworn statements from every employee who was on duty. That includes you, David." "Absolutely, Ms. Turner. It will be the first thing I do." "And third," she said, her voice dropping slightly, taking on an even harder edge. She gave a short, sharp nod in the direction of the teller line, where Karen's sobbing had become audible, a pathetic gulping sound. "I want her," Monica stated, her meaning unmistakable, "placed on immediate, unpaid administrative leave, pending a full investigation by corporate HR and legal. Her system access is to be revoked, and she is to be escorted from the premises. Not by them," she added, with a dismissive glance at the two police officers, "but by branch security." David nodded again, his face a mixture of relief that he was being given orders to follow and terror at the orders themselves. "Right away, Ms. Turner. I am so sorry. I can't tell you how—" "Save your apologies, David," Monica cut in, her voice flat and final. "They don't change what happened here. The words were not cruel. They were simply a statement of fact. An apology could not erase the feeling of the cold steel on her wrists. It could not erase the burning shame of being paraded like a criminal in front of a crowd. It could not erase the memory of Officer Jones's mocking smirk. Apologies were words, and what had happened here was a physical, visceral thing that was now a part of her. With that, she turned. The conversation was over. Her business in this branch was concluded. She turned without another word and walked towards the door, the same door she had been dragged towards just moments earlier. The crowd of customers, which had been a frozen wall of shocked faces, now seemed to melt away from her path. They parted for her like the Red Sea, their expressions no longer filled with morbid curiosity, but with a complex mixture of awe, pity, and a deep collective shame for their own silent complicity. They had been spectators at her humiliation, and now they were witnesses to her quiet, steely resurrection. She didn't look at any of them. She didn't acknowledge their presence. Her gaze was fixed forward, her posture erect, her head held high. She pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the bright, indifferent sunlight of the autumn afternoon. The crisp air felt clean against her skin, a welcome antidote to the stale, charged atmosphere of the bank. She walked away, her steps even and unhurried, leaving a crater of silence and barely contained panic behind her. Inside the bank, the spell was broken. The silence shattered as David Chen, his face grim, began barking orders into his phone. His voice sharp with the adrenaline of a man trying to contain a nuclear meltdown. "Get security to the teller line now, and someone get legal on the phone. Tell them we have a code red. No, a code black." The younger teller, Maria, rushed to comfort Karen, who was now weeping hysterically, the full weight of her catastrophic misjudgment crashing down upon her. The two police officers, Smith and Jones, exchanged a single panicked look, a silent acknowledgement that their careers were likely over. The woman who had been filming slowly lowered her phone, her face pale. The video file, a perfect high-definition recording of the entire incident, from the officer's arrival to Monica's final, powerful exit, was already there. A few taps, a quick upload, and the consequences of this Saturday morning would begin to ripple outwards, far beyond the marble walls of the Oakwood branch. Monica's walk into the bank had been one of freedom and anonymity. Her walk out was the opposite, a journey into exposure, but one she took on her own terms, wrapped not in shame, but in a newfound, formidable, and unyielding power. The ordeal was over. The reckoning was just beginning. The video spread like a digital wildfire. It had been uploaded within an hour of Monica walking out of the Oakwood branch, and by Sunday morning, it was the #1 trending topic on every social media platform. The footage was damningly clear, shot with a steady hand that captured every nuance of the unfolding disaster. It showed the officer's arrogant dismissal, Officer Jones's mocking smirk when Monica stated her title, the brutal efficiency of the handcuffing, and the raw, chafed skin on her wrists when the cuffs were finally, frantically removed. But most powerfully, it captured Monica's quiet, unyielding dignity in the face of it all. The internet gave her a name, Noju VPN handcuffs. The fallout was swift and brutal. Sterling Trust Bank's stock took a nosedive in pre-market trading on Monday. The local police department was buried under an avalanche of furious calls and emails. The story was a PR nightmare of epic proportions, a perfect self-contained parable of racial bias in modern America. By Monday afternoon, the consequences had begun to roll downhill. Karen, the teller whose feeling had ignited the firestorm, was summarily fired, her termination effective immediately. Officers Smith and Jones were placed on indefinite desk duty, their badges and service weapons confiscated pending a full internal affairs investigation that everyone knew would be a public spectacle. The following week, Monica sat in the main corporate boardroom on the 50th floor of Sterling Trust Tower. The view of the city, usually a source of pride and inspiration, was a gray, indifferent panorama through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The mood in the room was funereal. The long, polished mahogany table reflected the somber faces of the entire executive board, a collection of the most powerful people in the company, all of them looking at her with a mixture of pity, fear, and desperate deference. The CEO, a man named Arthur Vance, who usually commanded every room with an easy patrician charm, looked haggard and exhausted. They had spent the past week in crisis mode, issuing public apologies, holding emergency press conferences, and trying to stanch the bleeding of their reputation. They had already offered Monica everything they could think of, a desperate flurry of reparations, a larger bonus, a multi-year paid vacation to anywhere in the world, a private car service, a public commendation. She had refused it all, politely but firmly, her quiet refusals unnerving them far more than any angry outburst would have. "Monica, again," Arthur Vance began, his voice heavy with a practiced sincerity, "we are profoundly, deeply sorry for what you endured. It was a failure on every level, and it is a stain on this institution. We want to make it right. Just tell us what you want. Anything. A new title, a different department, a blank check. We will do anything." The other board members nodded in solemn agreement, their eyes fixed on her, waiting for her to name her price, to give them the easy way out. Monica looked at their faces, at these powerful men and women who had been her colleagues and mentors. She saw their genuine regret, but underneath it, she also saw their fear. They wanted to fix the problem of Monica Turner so they could get back to the business of banking. They didn't yet understand that Monica Turner was no longer the problem to be solved. She was the one who would be providing the solution. She didn't answer him directly. Instead, she stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked to the head of the table, where a large presentation screen was waiting. She picked up the remote, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a single, stark title, the Sterling Trust Fairness and Accountability Initiative. She turned to face the board, her expression not one of anger or bitterness, but of a deep, unshakable purpose. "What I want," she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating with a newfound authority that silenced the room, "is to make sure this never, ever happens again. To anyone." She clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared. It wasn't an emotional plea. It was a chart filled with data points and analytics. "This," she began, "is our own data. It shows the average time it takes to resolve a customer service issue, broken down by the demographic profile of the branch's zip code. As you can see, in neighborhoods with a higher percentage of minority residents, resolution times are nearly 30% longer. This isn't about feelings, it's about facts. Our system, as it currently exists, is not equitable." She moved to the next slide, which showed a flowchart of the protocol for flagging suspicious transactions. "I used the incident at the Oakwood branch as a case study in systemic failure," she explained, her tone as cool and professional as if she were analyzing a quarterly earnings report. The initial flag was based on subjective bias, not objective criteria. The escalation procedure was ambiguous, which allowed a single employee's poor judgment to lead directly to law enforcement involvement, a catastrophic failure of our duty of care. The system itself guided Karen to the wrong decision. For the next 20 minutes, Monica laid out her proposal. It was not a minor course correction. It was a comprehensive top-to-bottom overhaul of the bank's relationship with its customers. It was detailed, data-driven, and brilliant. She proposed 4 main pillars for the Sterling Trust Fairness and Accountability Initiative. First, she announced, we are scrapping our current bias training. It's ineffective. We will replace it with Bias Training 2.0, a new curriculum designed in partnership with leading sociologists and psychologists. It will be scenario-based, using immersive virtual reality modules that place our employees directly into the shoes of customers from different backgrounds. They won't just be told about bias, they will feel what it's like to be on the receiving end of it. She clicked to the next slide. Second, we are implementing new, transparent, and ironclad protocols for flagging large transactions. Any flag on a deposit over $10,000 will require a second, senior-level sign-off from a manager who has been through the new training. The protocol will explicitly, in bold print, forbid involving law enforcement unless there is a direct, credible, and verifiable threat of violence or an active crime in progress. A customer's appearance is not a credible threat. Another click. Third, we will establish community review boards in every major district we serve. These boards will be composed of local community leaders, small business owners, and everyday customers. They will meet quarterly to review anonymized customer complaint data, audit our performance, and advise bank leadership on how we can better serve their communities. We will give the community a seat at our table. She paused, letting the weight of that proposal sink in before delivering her final, most radical point. And fourth, we will implement executive accountability. Starting this fiscal year, 20% of all senior executive bonuses from the CEO down, including my own, will be directly tied to measurable improvements in equity and customer satisfaction scores across all demographics. If the numbers in our most underserved communities don't go up, our bonuses go down. We will put our money where our mouth is. When she finished, a profound silence filled the boardroom. The board members were stunned, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. They had been prepared for a lawsuit, for a settlement, for an angry resignation. They were not prepared for this. They were not prepared for a meticulously researched, strategically brilliant business proposal that took their single greatest public relations crisis and transformed it into a blueprint for industry leadership. Arthur Vance stared at the final slide, then at Monica, who stood at the head of the table, poised and in complete command. He saw the genius of it. It wasn't just a fix, it was a story of redemption, of leadership, of a bank that had made a terrible mistake and had the courage to not just apologize, but to fundamentally change. It was a story that would be worth billions in restored public trust. He looked around the table at the other board members, and he saw the same realization dawning in their eyes. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. All in favor of approving the Sterling Trust, Fairness and Accountability Initiative as proposed by Vice President Turner. Say, aye. A chorus of ayes, clear and unanimous, echoed through the boardroom. Months later, the harsh light of the boardroom had been replaced by the warm, optimistic glow of a state-of-the-art training facility. The room was filled with the faces of 50 new branch managers, a diverse group of men and women from all over the country, the first class to be trained under Monica's new initiative. Monica stood at the front of the room, not behind a lectern, but walking freely among them, her presence both powerful and approachable. She was dressed in one of her signature power suits, but her demeanor was that of a passionate teacher, not a distant executive. She had just finished telling them her story, the full story of that Saturday at the Oakwood branch. She told it not with anger or bitterness, but with the calm, focused clarity of a lesson learned, a lesson she was now determined to impart to every leader in the company. The incident at the Oakwood branch, she said, her voice resonating with a deep, heartfelt conviction, was not about one employee's bad judgment. It was about a system that allowed that judgment to flourish, a culture that failed to build a strong enough foundation of trust and respect. Our job, as leaders of this institution, is not just to manage money, it is to build trust. And trust is not built on assumptions, it is built on respect. It is earned with every single customer interaction, from a $10 withdrawal to a $50,000 deposit. Today, she concluded, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of each and every manager, we begin the work of earning it back, one customer at a time. She looked out at the faces before her, and for the first time in a long time, she saw not just employees, but partners. She saw understanding, commitment, and a shared sense of purpose in their eyes. The camera of her memory pulled back, showing her not as a victim of a flawed system, but as the architect of its change. Her personal trauma had been reforged into her professional legacy, a legacy that would extend far beyond the walls of any single bank branch, ensuring that no one else would ever have to endure the cold, sharp click of handcuffs for the crime of not looking the part. The fortress of her success had not been a fantasy after all. It had simply been incomplete. Now she was rebuilding it, not just for herself, but for everyone, on a foundation of fairness, accountability, and a profound, unshakable respect for the dignity of all.